Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 491st episode, we've got a new dinosaur.
Yay!
It's a titanosaur. It's pretty cute.
More yay! Also, what made dinosaurs so successful that they dominated the Earth for 160 million years? Turns out it was a combination of things.
A new study.
A couple.
Oh.
They seem to go together. We also have Dinosaur of the Day Limusaurus, which, Garrett, you spoiled at the end of last week's episode.
Well, it's a really interesting dinosaur. When you tease that it had interesting teeth.
Yeah.
It's maybe the most interesting teeth that you can find in a dinosaur, or lack thereof.
Fair point.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a fun fact related to dinosaur growth.
Nice.
Well, size, I should say.
But before we get into all of that, as always, we like to thank some of our patrons. And this week we have a new patron to thank, and that's Linda. Thank you very much for joining. And then rounding out our shoutouts, we have Michael, Xenorama, Pata, Robert, Tomosaurus, Eric, Cynthia, Bobby, and Tarkia Tamer.
Welcome, everybody. And thank you so much for being part of our community. It makes a huge difference for us. I mean, it's why we can keep doing this show. Which, speaking of, if you like this show, it really helps us out if you tell a friend about it. I recently heard some advice about text your friend a link to the show.
So if you have a friend that likes dinosaurs, text them a link of I Know Dino.
That would be amazing. And then let us know if you did it.
Jumping into the news, I'm starting with our new titanosaur.
All right.
It's very exciting. I like it a lot.
Good.
Even though it's a little off character for me, being the ankylosaur guy.
Must be a really cool titanosaur.
It is really cool.
Or are you finally coming around to sauropods being awesome?
I mean, a little bit. So this titanosaur was published in Historical Biology, and it was written up by Agustin Perez Moreno and others. And it's a continuation of our Year of the Titanosaur.
Oh, I like how this year's shaping up.
I recently mentioned that we had 5 named in each 2022 and 2023. Now we have a 4th already for 2024, and we've barely started 2024.
Yes, keep them coming.
I guess we'll have to see what goes on with tyrannosaurs, if this becomes the Year of the Titanosaur or Tyrannosaur, because the dueling dinosaurs are about to go on display or have just gone on display in progress work in North Carolina. So that could make it more tyrannosaur-y, depending on what happens.
True.
Depending on if that's a nanotyrannus or a juvenile T-Rex or something else that's battling.
But you were saying about the sauropods.
Oh yeah, sorry, getting sidetracked. So the new titanosaur is named Titanomachya, and it's a little cutie.
Is it one of those small titanosaurs that sounds kind of odd to say, because when you hear titanosaur, you think big?
Yes, it is. So it's basically elephant-sized.
Ooh.
They estimate it's roughly 5.8 to 9.8 tons. So the middle point there is 7.8 tons. And they found a lot of the legs. So we can tell it was probably just under 2 meters or 6 feet tall at the hips. And then depending on sort of the angle of the neck, could be significantly taller than that, or basically that's as high as it got.
That is small for a titanosaur.
It is. Unfortunately, we don't have much other than the legs. We basically just have ribs and one vertebra from the rest of the body. We have a good set of legs, though, like most of the back legs and a little bit of the front legs. So we have that good height estimate, but we really don't know the length of the animal. From their skeletal, it's very roughly about 6 meters or under 20 feet long, but that is completely unknown at this point since, again, we don't really have any of the vertebrae, and that's what determines how long it is. The dinosaur's full name is Titanomachya gimenezi, and I'm going to start with the species name because it's more straightforward. Gimenezi. Gimenezi is, quote, in honor of the late Dr. Olga Jimenez, who was the first female paleontologist that studied the dinosaurs from Chubut province, end quote.
Cool.
Yeah, the Chubut province is a good chunk of Patagonia in southern Argentina, and it's an amazing place to find dinosaurs. Sauropods like Patagotitan have been found there. That's one of the largest dinosaurs ever found anywhere in the world. and it's on display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. So I think it's gotten pretty famous. It's also one of the best known large sauropods. So that also brought it into a lot of international attention. Chubut Province also has huge carnivores like Tyrannotitan, which is a close relative of Giganotosaurus.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I don't know much about Dr. Olga Jimenez. Back in 1986, she was one of the authors on the Xenotarsosaurus description. Xenotarsosaurus isn't very well known, but it might have been like Carnotaurus.
Oh, cool.
And Carnotaurus is also from the Chubut province. But the genus name, Titanomachya, is absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. It's named after the Titanomachy, which literally translates as Titan battle. In Greek mythology, it was a 10-year war between the older Titans and the younger Olympian gods.
Ooh, didn't the older Titans lose?
Yeah, spoiler alert. Yes, they did. The Olympian gods are far more famous today. They include Zeus, Poseidon, Athena, Artemis, tons of other gods that lots of people know the names of. I think the Titans that are the most famous are the ones that got punished in interesting ways. So one famous Titan is Atlas, who is forced to hold up the heavens or the sky, depending on your interpretation, after the Titanomachy. And last week's dinosaur, Thyreosaurus atlasicus, is indirectly named after Atlas because T. atlasicus is named after the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, which are named after the Titan Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
According to some people, that's where Atlas was, where he holds up the heavens and the sky. Another famous Titan is Prometheus, who stole fire from the Olympian gods and gave it to humanity. And his punishment is being tied to a rock and having his liver eaten out every day by an eagle.
Oof.
And then it grows back every night, and then it gets eaten again the next day.
Sounds very painful.
Yes. Eventually, Hercules freed him, though. That's one tidbit that's often left out. So you don't have to feel bad for Prometheus anymore, because he got out. I think, according to some reports, Atlas is no longer required to hold anything up anymore either. The reason for why they chose Titanomachia as the name for this new sauropod is also really cool. They call it Titanomachia because, quote, it comes from the time when the titanosaurs became extinct, end quote.
Oh, when titanosaurs lost the battle.
Exactly. And I guess in this analogy, sauropods are the titans and mammals are the Olympian gods. Or maybe the asteroid is the Olympian gods, specifically Zeus. I don't know. I might be overthinking this analogy a little bit.
Could be, yeah.
But all we know for sure is that the Titans lost, just like the Titanosaurs. So, Titanomachia. At first, when I saw the name, I was thinking Titan battle. This must be some huge, impressive Titanosaur that would beat everything. But considering the Titans lost, kind of makes sense that it's not the biggest and most ferocious Titan.
But it is one of the last.
Yes. So some of the dinosaurs I named earlier from the Chubut province were fairly close to the middle of the Cretaceous. Patagotitan, for example, is from the Ceratosaurian Formation, and Patagotitan is thought to be about 102 million years old, whereas Titanomachia is from a much younger formation. It's from the La Colonia Formation, and that formation was originally thought to be Campanian, or in this case about 72 million years old. Now it's thought to be Maastrichtian, in this case about 66 to 70 million years old, which is about as late as it gets, possibly overlapping with Hell Creek and T-Rex and Triceratops and all those famous dinosaurs.
The end of the end.
Yep. The latest Cretaceous, people sometimes say. That's where Carnotaurus is from, that La Colonia Formation. And that means that Carnotaurus may have been roaming South America while T-Rex roamed North America.
Two big carnivores with short arms.
Yep, very true. It also means that this Titanosaur probably would have encountered Carnotaurus face to face. Carnotaurus probably didn't encounter T-Rex since they lived very far apart. Other dinosaurs that have been found in that formation before have been really scrappy. There was an unnamed abelosaurid. There was a single osteoderm, probably from an ankylosaur, some foot bones from a duck-billed dinosaur, scraps from a theropod and a sauropod, but this is the second named dinosaur after Carnotaurus. Titanomachia isn't the first titanosaur that we know from the very end of the Cretaceous, though. You might think that from the name being the end of the titanosaurs, that it's a new thing, but it isn't really. There are other contemporary titanosaurs in other formations, including one of my favorites, Saltosaurus, which is from farther north in Argentina.
Speaking of osteoderms.
Yep. There's also Nulotitan, which was named from farther south in southern Patagonia back in 2019. But Titanomachia is the first named titanosaur from this formation, so that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Most of its unique features are from its astragalus, the ankle bone, which is unusual for a sauropod. Usually sauropods are described from vertebrae, I would say, in most cases. They did find a combination of other features not seen together in any other dinosaurs. Sometimes we call them a mosaic of features. And those include the vertebrae and the shoulder, but they don't have any actual specific, completely unique details. Titanomachia is classified as a saltosauroid, meaning it's similar to Saltosaurus. But unfortunately, the one-tail vertebra that we have from it isn't near the end, so we can't tell if Titanomachia had a tail club like Saltosaurus may have, which is a bummer.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think it did.
Go ahead and think it.
Until we find vertebrae to prove me wrong or right. Interestingly, it was similar in size to Saltosaurus as well as Nukensaurus, but Titanomachia was probably heavier. So maybe it had an even more impressive tail club.
That'd be cool.
It's really bulking up.
All right. Keeping up with the sauropod goodness, I've got a quick update that the mamenchisaurid Jingia, in quotes, dongxingensis, has now been renamed to Jingiella dongxingensis. And we talked about this dinosaur, it's a new one, in episode 484. It's a mamenchisaurid, which means that it probably had a really long neck, but no neck bones have been found, at least not yet. There's other parts of the skeleton have been found that show that it's a mamenchisaurid, including vertebrae, parts of the arms, and part of the thigh bone.
And as a reminder, mamenchisaurids are sauropods, the long-necked dinosaurs, but they're just the longest-necked of the long-necked dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really what they're known for. We kind of saw this coming with the name change because the name Jingia was already in use for a moth that was named back in 1983. So it looks like there was some kind of error that happened there. And now we've got the official name. And again, that's Jingiella.
Jingiella. That's a good name.
Mm-hmm.
It happens quite a bit, especially it seems to be with invertebrates. Maybe just because there are so many more invertebrates than vertebrates that they occupy a lot of the existing names.
I could see too, when you're naming a dinosaur, you don't think to look for similar names with moths, for example.
Yes. Although in this case, it makes a lot of sense. Occasionally there's something that ends in like saurus that's been used by like, say, a mammal. That happens occasionally. But when you're talking about an animal that just has a more generic name like Jingia, it doesn't have any of those like titan or raptor, those common things that are used for dinosaurs and not usually seen elsewhere. It's probably a good idea to do a little more thorough of a search.
But I could see how you just get wrapped up in the excitement. New dinosaur, especially a new sauropod.
It's surprising to me that it didn't get caught in the peer review process because with the internet and being able to Google through all the different names, you'd think it would pop up.
It might have, because when it was first published, the name was in quotes because they knew that they had to change the name at some point.
Oh, interesting. I'm surprised they didn't just not publish it, like delay the publication while they renamed it.
Well, I don't know at what point in the process the quotes appeared.
Oh, that's true. And they did the right process too, because usually when you use the wrong name, somebody points it out and then the authors have a chance to go back and rename it. It's not usually just open season on renaming that dinosaur, whoever publishes first. Usually the original authors will go back and rename it.
Actually, I take it back. It's not in quotes in the paper that named it. What I was thinking of is it was in quotes in everything that talked about it as soon as the paper came out.
So other people noticed.
Or maybe it just all got noticed at once.
Small snafu in the peer review process, but quickly corrected.
Mm-hmm. We'll talk about what made dinosaurs so successful in a moment, but first we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. I feel like talking about sauropods is a good segue into why dinosaurs were so successful. That could be my bias there. But sauropods were so successful and they were so big. And we also just recently did that episode where I was just talking about big dinosaurs, especially the sauropods. But yeah, sauropods came way later in dinosaur history. So even though they were successful, things happened beforehand that made dinosaurs overall so successful.
Yeah, especially if you're talking about true sauropods, quote unquote, and not sauropodomorphs, which were all over the place in the Triassic, whereas the real sauropods, the big quadrupedal, long-necked, especially long-necked, maybe I should say, dinosaurs, didn't really show up until the Jurassic.
But what's really cool is that dinosaurs as a whole ruled the Earth for more than 160 million years, which is an unfathomable amount of time to me.
It is very long.
Yeah. So how did they do it? Well, it turns out it was probably a mix of factors, including being adaptable, the ability to breathe efficiently, having a high metabolism, and growing fast. And I'm going to break it down because it's not exactly that simple. It never is with dinosaurs. First, by talking about their growth. There was a study by Amy Shipley and others in the Royal Society Publishing, it's open access recently, that looked at whether early dinosaurs walking on two legs and being fast runners is what set dinosaurs apart. Spoilers, not really.
Oh, really? That's like been the traditional reason given for a very long time, that they had a different size of like caudofemoralis muscle. They were more upright, so they were faster and able to catch prey more quickly, and then they would have outcompeted the other predators, and thus the early dinosaurs were really successful. All the early dinosaurs were thought to be carnivorous, so being able to hunt better would be a good advantage, and then later on diversifying into herbivores. But that's not what they found, huh?
Not exactly. Like, it did help them, but it's not the reason they became so successful.
Okay. So what is the reason?
Well, let me tell you about the study first.
Okay.
They compared the limb bones of 208 species, so the arm and leg bones, of animals that lived in the Triassic through the early Jurassic.
So when all the dinosaurs were rising in their niches and starting to take over.
Yes, but they're not just looking at dinosaurs. They looked at archosauromorphs, pterosaurs, and pseudoseuchians too.
Oh, that makes sense. So you could get a comparison.
Because the Triassic's a weird time.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in depth about pseudoseuchians in our monthly bonus show for patrons, I Know Paleo, episode 8 to be specific. But as a quick recap, pseudoseuchians are this really big, interesting group of animals. They're closely related to dinosaurs. They're still around today, and they include crocodiles and alligators. But there used to be a lot more of them, and they came in all shapes and sizes, and they were a lot more dominant than dinosaurs in the Triassic. But then some things changed, and many of them died in the mass extinction.
Yeah, and I think pseudoseuchians as a term usually refers to those Triassic forms, I would say. Just like when you say dinosaurs, you're not usually talking about birds. When people say pseudoseuchians, they're not usually talking about modern crocodiles.
That's a good point.
And they were pretty dinosaur-like. If you're not a huge dinosaur nerd and you saw a pseudoseuchian, you might say, look at that crazy dinosaur.
Yeah, that's fair. So the team, they took length measurements of these bones and they estimated the body size of the animals based on the length of the femur or the thigh bone. And then they used their measurements to determine if the animal walked on 2 legs or 4 and if they could run well. And like I said, there were a lot of big changes happening in the Triassic. It was a weird time. It turns out, based on the study, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and their relatives had more variation in their limbs and therefore a wider range of ways that they could move. Though the earliest dinosaurs were on 2 legs and fast runners. Pseudoseuchians, though, like crocodiles and their relatives, had more limited locomotor motion, and that made them more vulnerable to going extinct. The pseudoseuchians had a more sprawling posture, and that meant there's more bending in the spine and it compressed the lungs and limited their air supply. Versus dinosaurs had an erect posture, so that doesn't mean the bending on the spine, and animals with an erect posture are more efficient when they're moving around. As a side note, the erect stance also makes it possible to get really large, so you can't be a huge sprawler.
Oh, yeah. Because in the sprawl position, it's a little bit like doing a plank or like a permanent push up. So it works well if you're spending a lot of time sort of resting on the ground. And then you do a little bit of a getting up to crawl around and then plop back down again. But if you're spending a ton of time walking around, or if you weigh a lot, that would be very difficult. That would be a lot of strain.
Yeah. So the early dinosaurs, being on two legs and everything, they could run fast for short bursts, and that's good for catching prey and running away from predators. But that isn't really what helped dinosaurs as a whole. Because even by the end of the Triassic, some dinosaurs were walking on all fours.
Hmm.
What happened was that the climates changed from wet to dry, so food was harder to find. And this hurt the Pseudotsuchians a lot more than the dinosaurs, because dinosaurs were more adaptable. So again, being bipedal, walking on two legs, and being a fast runner was advantageous in the beginning, but over time and by the end of the Triassic, it wasn't essential for dinosaurs' success. It could actually be that the diversity in how dinosaurs moved is what made them so successful. The study, they found that dinosaurs had a lot of variation in their limb bones, which means that there are different ways of walking and running. And then eventually dinosaurs moved into other niches in the early Jurassic. But that's when they were already the dominating group. So they kind of just took over the niches that Pseudotsuchians had previously filled, but then those Pseudotsuchians went extinct. Interestingly, the study found that dinosaurs also didn't evolve faster than other groups of animals. And that means that they probably didn't expand into these new forms soon after extinction events. It would have taken them a while to evolve to these larger sizes and more of them walking on all fours, for example. So it was that being adaptable, plus a few other factors, again, like the ability to breathe efficiently, having a high metabolism, and growing fast, that when you put it all together, that's why they did so well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think from a simplistic mindset that I have to always fight reverting back to, it always seems almost like a what would win in a fight sort of logic to evolution, where it's like, oh, this one was bigger and meaner, so of course it got to eat, whereas the smaller one got scared away. But it's never really that simple. And in this case, it's the same thing where it's like, okay, that one's faster, so it's able to catch more prey, which is obviously a good thing. But we've encountered this before too, where the really, really beneficial thing tends to be about efficiency. It's not nearly as exciting to say, oh yeah, that dinosaur, look at its really efficient body plan. Imagine how few calories it would spend walking from one prey item to another, or from one patch of trees or shrubs to another. But really, when you're talking about the ability to survive for a long period of time, not wasting a lot of calories is a huge advantage. And it's why in animals that have these big display structures, there's always that balance of, well, that big display structure cost calories. And that's the real show off feature of it is, look at me. I don't need to be really efficient. I can have this big display structure and basically waste energy on it. Whereas these smaller animals that are more sickly or whatever can't grow such a big display structure.
Yeah, like you were saying, the ability to conserve your energy helps because if a big natural disaster happens or, something changes that causes a bunch of mass extinctions, you want to be able to conserve your energy to survive, be able to hunker down and survive that. Because if you can't, you're kind of out of luck.
Yeah. Or even if it's just a regular ecosystem which doesn't have a lot of resources. Like I always think of kangaroo, and they just cover huge amounts of land. So do emu, where they cover 10, 20 miles a day in the Australian outback to get little patches of food here and there. And they're both designed to just be so efficient at covering long distances. Whereas if you throw a human out there or like a wolf or something, there's no way it can cover all that land because it's just not getting enough calories.
Unless you have a car as a human.
Yeah. But in general, covering all that distance takes a lot of calories for most animals. But then these ones that have adaptations to be really efficient covering long distances can thrive in those ecosystems. So you could imagine that if there were like kangaroo everywhere, and then we went through a period where there were less resources, kangaroo might really take off, whereas maybe something like deer or something less efficient might not.
Well, then there's the other thing that helped dinosaurs out but again, it's just a piece of the puzzle, is that they grew fast. And that brings me to the next study, which again shows it's not quite that clear cut. It's not like dinosaurs grew fast, that's why they did so well.
Yeah, because we just talked about another reason.
Yes. Also, even though early dinosaurs did grow fast, and that was a good thing for them, they weren't the only animals at that time growing fast.
Oh, yeah.
So I mentioned earlier, recently had a whole episode about the biggest dinosaurs and how they got so big. Episode 486, if you want to check it out. But this paper is all about how the way early dinosaurs grew may have helped dinosaurs overall be so successful. So I see it as like an update or an add-on to our growth episode. That's why I mentioned it.
So what you're saying is the first dinosaurs had adaptations to grow that were helpful for later dinosaurs.
It's more like growing fast seemed to set them apart, except it turns out it didn't.
That's confusing.
Yes. This paper was published by Christina Curry Rogers and others in PLOS One. It's also open access. And I liked how they put it. Dinosaurs, quote, debuted on Earth's stage, end quote, after the Permo-Triassic mass extinction event, quote, and survived 2 other Triassic extinction intervals to eventually dominate terrestrial ecosystems, end quote. It's pretty impressive. They survived several extinction events and then they just took over. And in the late Triassic, which is more than 231 million years ago, in Argentina, they said, quote, dinosaurs were just getting warmed up.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we often say the Triassic wasn't really the dinosaurs' heyday. There was a lot of other stuff going on in the Triassic. It's really Jurassic Cretaceous that was all dinosaur
Yes.
dominance, mostly.
There were other animals at the time, including synapsids and pseudopsuchians, that had similar features related to how they moved, ate, breathed, that could have made them the dominant animals. But it was the dinosaurs, as we all know, in the later Mesozoic that were so successful. And again, growing fast seemed to be what set them apart. So the question of this study was, when did these elevated growth rates first evolve? So they went into it thinking growing fast was why dinosaurs did well.
So like the last group went in saying, okay, maybe it's the running fast is why they did well.
Mhm.
And then they found maybe it was more the efficiency. This team's going in saying, maybe it's the growing fast that made them do so well.
Yep.
But when did that evolve? Just to double check.
Yes, but then they found, oh wait, other animals at the same time also grew fast. So they analyzed bone tissues from an ecosystem level, which means that they studied the femora or thigh bones of 5 early dinosaurs and 7 of their non-dinosaurian contemporaries, other animals that lived around the same time and place. And all of them are from the Ischigualasto Formation in San Juan Province, Argentina, which means late Triassic time. And these animals lived in an arid to semi-arid, highly seasonal climate.
Yes. And even though it's quote unquote late Triassic, it's pretty early.
Right, because the late Triassic is most of the Triassic.
In a weird, confusing way. But that formation is usually the one we're talking about when we're talking about the earliest dinosaurs. That's like a super important formation.
So they did histology on the bones to determine how quickly an animal grew. They cut them open to study. And you can tell based on fibers, how they look, whether it was fast or slow growth. Fibrolamellar bone, for example, shows relatively fast growth, and it looks like woven fibered bone. They also looked at the rates of bone remodeling and lags, lines of arrested growth, which, again, you can compare those to growth rings you see on a tree and then kind of count to see how old, or roughly how old an animal was. The authors recommended looking at ontogenetic or growth series because remodeling, quote, can obliterate, end quote, how the bones look or the bone deposition from when the animal was younger and smaller. And then looking at the growth series too, you can see a comparative relative growth. So you just get more information. The dinosaurs that were included in the study includes the sauropodomorph Chromogesaurus, the theropod Eodromeus, the sauropodomorph Eoraptor. You might not guess that was a sauropodomorph based on the name. The saurischian Herrerasaurus, and the Herrerasaurid Sanjuansaurus. And all of these dinosaurs walked on 2 legs.
And some of those are very famous for being earliest dinosaurs.
Yeah, like Eoraptor. The other 7 animals in the study were a mix of cynodont, archosauromorph, crocodilomorph, and other pseudopsuchians. And all of the animals that they studied ranged from weighing under 25 kilograms, or about 55 pounds, to over 250 kilograms, or about 550 pounds. It's a pretty good range. And they included herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, animals that walked on 2 legs or 4. Some were sprawlers, some walked upright, and some, meaning 5 of the animals, were only known from the holotypes, meaning we only know them based on one specimen or one individual.
Yeah, I was thinking when you said they wanted to look at ontogenetic series, meaning have a whole bunch of individuals and see how they changed as they grew up. That's nice, but is so rarely possible.
Well, it's nice to strive for when you can.
Yeah.
And it's for future studies too. You can keep updating. So they did mention there's some limitations from just looking at the femora, the thigh bones, and how the animals walked could impact some bone histology. They also limited their sample to minimize variations, but they did make sure to sample the same element in a similar location for every animal to help control for histological differences. So just try to keep it as similar as possible so that you can better see what the differences are. They chose mostly animals from the same biozone of the formation, also for more consistency. The Ischigualasto Formation is divided into 3 biozones from the base to the top. All except Eodromeus, basal theropod, was from the HEH biozone. That's the Hyperodipedon Exertodon Herrerasaurus biozone.
Ooh, I can see why they call it HEH.
Yeah. So the HEH biozone, it had mostly mid-sized non-dinosaurian herbivores. The earliest known dinosaurs in that biozone represent about 11% of the animals found, and the dinos are mostly carnivores and small omnivores and or herbivores. There's some mass mortalities in this area, possibly from droughts. And only 2 individuals in the samples were skeletally mature. So, like I said at the beginning, they found that dinosaurs grew fast, but so did crocodilomorphs, archosauriforms, and large pseudopsuchians.
So they're basically all growing fast.
All but one. One animal grew slowly and cyclically. That's the archosauriform pseudocampsa, or pseudochampsa. Then 3 of the non-dinosaurs grew fast, but punctuated. They had these annual lags that punctuated growth, so it showed that they had growth cycles. And then 8 of the animals, including all 5 of the dinosaurs, had fast and continuous growth.
Okay, so the dinosaurs were faster.
Yes, but so were 3 of the other animals. An archosauriform, an archosaur, and a crocodilomorph. So this study helps show the oldest known dinosaurs already grew quickly and continuously, though that might not be the case for all early dinosaurs.
Just all the 5 that they looked at?
Yes. But it shows that this growing quickly and continuously happened very early on, and it wasn't only dinosaurs doing it. And also, these dinosaurs grew about as fast as some living mammals and birds. So the author said in the future it would help to study more specimens, especially ones in growth series.
Yeah, it would be helpful. Just go find a growth series of a Triassic dinosaur. It's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, it could be possible in the future.
It's happened, but yeah, it's not common. So it sounds like of these 2 studies, the upright posture and the ability to move fast may have still been important. The ability to hunt possibly a little more successfully, but then that ability to grow fast and continuously and the efficiency while moving around also are important things to include.
Yeah, you keep saying efficiency, but it's also an adaptability thing. Because they had different ways of moving, they were able to adapt to changes. I think that first paper, which was about locomotion, was more about how the different limb proportions of dinosaurs gave them more variety in how they move, their locomotion, versus the pseudopsuchians were more consistent, and that was kind of their downfall during that mass extinction event.
So meaning the dinosaurs, some of them had a longer upper leg and a shorter lower leg. Some of them were reversed. Some of them had different things going on with their arms. So they, as a whole group, dinosaurs had a lot more variability in the ways that they could move.
Yes, which to me means as a group, they were more adaptable.
Gotcha. So when something changed in the environment, even if some of the dinosaurs died out because they were poorly adapted to it, some of the others might have thrived. Whereas with the Pseudoseuchians, they were all doing the same thing. And if it wasn't right for one of them, it wasn't right for any of them.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, lots of factors that helped with dinosaurs as a whole be successful. And just two of the pieces have to do with how they moved and how fast they grew.
And not just how fast they moved.
Yes. We'll get into our dinosaur of the day, Limusaurus, in just a moment. First, a quick break for our sponsors. And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Limusaurus, which was a request from Crow via our Patreon and Discord. So thanks. It was a Ceratosaurian theropod that lived in the Late Jurassic in what is now China in the Shishugou Formation. Ceratosaurs, they're famous for being large predators, if you think Carnotaurus or Majungasaurus. But not all Ceratosaurs were large predators, or even known for that, like Limusaurus, because Limusaurus is famous for the strange way that its mouth changed as it grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And Limusaurus was small and slender. The holotype's estimated to be about 1.7 meters or 5.7 feet long and weigh 15 kilograms or 33 pounds.
That is a far cry from Carnotaurus.
Yes. Although there is one specimen of Limusaurus that's 15% larger than the holotype.
Oh, pushing 40 pounds almost.
Now, Limusaurus looked similar to Cretaceous ornithomimid theropods, as well as Triassic non-dinosaurian Shuvosaurids. So there seems to be some convergent evolution happening there. They're unrelated, but doing similar things.
Evolving to look similarly.
Yeah. Limusaurus had a long neck and legs, but short arms. It was probably a fast runner. Its arms were not used for any predatory purposes. It had 4 fingers on its hands, though the first finger was reduced. It was smaller. It was more like a vestigial finger.
So possibly its descendants might have lost that finger entirely.
It also had short, stout claw bones, a small head with large eyes, and a relatively tall, short skull, as well as long neck vertebrae, a large ridge at the front of the shoulder blade, and a reduced hallux, or a small first toe. It also had a wishbone. There's no direct evidence that Limusaurus had feathers, so we don't know that about it. But Limusaurus is one of the earliest known ceratosaurs and the first definite ceratosaur known from Asia. The type and only species is Limusaurus inextricabilis. The fossils were found between 2001 and 2006. It was found in 3 bone beds, and then Limusaurus was described in 2009 by Xu and others. And the genus name Limusaurus means mud lizard. The species name, inextricabilis, means, quote, impossible to extricate, end quote, and it refers to the specimens dying after being stuck in the mud.
Oh, okay. I was thinking that it was inexplicable, like hard to explain this weird animal, but that is a different word. Inextricable.
Yes.
For getting stuck really bad.
I suppose it is a little bit hard to explain, but it took a while to figure out that all the specimens in the bone bed were part of a growth series instead of being different, because they look so different.
Gotcha. So they didn't know how weird it was at
Yes.
first.
The holotype's a subadult. It's almost complete and articulated, so it's only missing some of its tail bones. Then the second specimen described was a large juvenile, though it's missing the front.
The front.
Now, since those 2 specimens were described, now 19 specimens have been described in total. Again, that was after a study in 2017 by Shuo Wang and others. They analyzed them and found that they represent 6 different growth stages. So many of these individuals were found together. It's possible that Limusaurus lived in groups. It seems that they got stuck in mud pits. This is not my favorite part of the story. Made by giant sauropod footprints.
Oh, really?
Yeah. These mud pits have been called dinosaur death pits.
So basically the sauropods were walking and making these giant mud messes.
They were just minding their own business, being sauropods, and Limusaurus got wrapped up. Wrong place, wrong time.
I'm imagining the equivalent of an off-roading vehicle just spinning its tires and just decimating the vegetation and just churning it into this muddy, sloppy mess. And then Limusaurus, or a group of friendly Limusaurus, come wandering along, and then they all just get stuck in this big, chaotic mess left by that inconsiderate sauropod.
No, the sauropod was just why it happened that the mud was probably soft. That was the problem. And then when the sauropod walked, the footprints would get backfilled with thick mud and it would have been hard to see. Nobody did anything wrong on purpose.
Okay.
But yeah, the mud pits are mostly Limusaurus. Guanlong was also found in them, as well as crocodiliforms, mammals, a turtle, and a cynodont.
Once again, sauropods killing turtles.
It was an accident. Anyway, it seems that the dinosaurs accumulated over an extended period of time. Less than a year, though, based on the climate having seasons and then the sediments in all three pits being similar. So sometime throughout a year. And based on many of these specimens being complete and articulate, they were probably buried quickly. Though there are some isolated body parts, so maybe those individuals were exposed for longer. Most of the Limusaurus individuals were on their sides, and in two of the pits, some skeletons were on top of each other. And many of them had flexed hind limbs, so they probably died in a resting pose. At least they were resting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks to the sauropod, we have this amazing growth series, and we found out how weird Limusaurus is.
Very true. Thanks, sauropod.
Silver linings, all worked out.
Killing all those Limusaurus for us.
They didn't mean it.
That is always the thing with dinosaur fossils, because in order for an animal to fossilize, it has to die.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always a little bit of a silver lining. But they would have died eventually. They weren't going to live 170 million years or whatever to be around today.
See? Worked out. So like I said, there was that 2017 study where they found the 19 specimens of Limusaurus represented 6 growth stages. There were 6 juveniles that were 1 year old or younger, and 10 subadults that were between 2 and 6 years old, and then 1 adult, so over 6 years old.
That's handy.
Yeah, so that shows that Limusaurus changed a lot as it grew up. Specifically, they found 78 anatomical changes as Limusaurus grew up.
That's cool. And it also tells me, if you're hypothesizing about maybe these animals live together, that would be not just a cohort of one age, because you've got multiple different ages potentially all living together in a much larger, possibly more complex structure than just individuals of the same age hanging out.
Yeah, because they would have eaten different things.
Although we should always caveat, just because they fossilized together doesn't mean they live together. It doesn't even necessarily mean that they died together, because like you said, it was over the span of possibly up to a year.
It could be that maybe a smaller group of them happened upon that mud pit together, but yeah, we don't know the timeline.
When there's 19 together, though, I think the simplest explanation is that at least some of them live together.
So some of the changes include the head becoming more shallow, the middle hand bones getting longer, the tips of the lower jaws getting more downturned. And then, of course, the biggest one is that the juveniles had teeth, but the adults had no teeth and instead had a beak.
So weird. I mean, I guess as humans, we're used to losing teeth as we get older.
But we replace the teeth. Oh, I guess after the second set, you don't replace them.
Yeah, once you get much older. But these are like 6-year-olds or whatever that have replaced their teeth with a beak.
Yes.
Really unusual.
It's a big change. And this change to being toothless probably means that its diet changed from being an omnivore to being an herbivore. The juveniles had 9 teeth on each side of the upper jaw and 12 teeth on each side of the lower jaw. They had actually at least 42 teeth. And then at the next stage in their growth, they had at least 34 teeth. So it went way down. And then there were no teeth in individuals over 1 year old.
Oh, so they lost them pretty fast.
Yeah, it seems that way. And then they became skeletally mature at 6 years old. Talk about growing up fast. The CT scans found only 5 empty tooth sockets in the adult's upper jaw, and then all the sockets in the lower jaw were fused and the rest of the tooth sockets were gone. Weird to think about.
So the fact that those tooth sockets are missing means it's not just we found a bunch of dinosaurs that happen to not have the teeth in the jaw. Like the jaw had remodeled to a point where there were not going to be teeth there.
Yeah.
So they're not just missing from that fossil.
Had no reason to have teeth. No need for those teeth anymore.
And no place for them.
No place. And adult Limusaurus have been found with gastroliths. And the older adults had more and larger gastroliths compared to the younger adults.
Oh, I see. So that's sort of the evidence for maybe them switching to herbivorous.
Mm-hmm. So maybe it was too large as an adult to eat insects, and it probably ate plants once it was an adult. A study of the isotopes found a wider range in the smaller, younger individuals compared to the older individuals, which were similar to plant eaters. So that gives the impression that it was omnivorous when it was young and then became herbivorous as it was older.
Yeah, because different food has different chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you can find isotope markers of the food in the bones. So those younger ones have more markers from more types of food potentially than the adults.
Yes. Now, we don't know of that many animals that completely lose their teeth as they grow up, but there are some, like the armored catfish and the platypus.
Of course, the platypus.
Shifted gears a little bit. Limusaurus helps with the hypothesis that tetanuran theropods went from having 5 fingers to 3 by losing their first and 5th fingers. And Limusaurus technically had 4 fingers again, but really there were only 3 functional fingers.
Oh, I see. So that's that transition. Like you said, the vestigial finger is still just barely there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I was saying, how the descendants might have only had 3. That's exactly what we're thinking in terms of later dinosaurs.
There's a few hypotheses on how theropods ended up with only 3 fingers on each hand. One is that only the 3 middle fingers, so the second, third, and fourth one, developed. Another hypothesis is the frame shift one, where the first finger just fails to grow, and then that ends up shifting fingers 1, 2, and 3 over to the positions of fingers 2, 3, and 4. Then there's the thumbs down hypothesis, where the frame shift happened after the first and fourth fingers shrunk. And then there's the lateral shift hypothesis, which is a frame shift from 4 fingers with a reduced or a short first and fourth fingers to where the first finger disappears, the fourth finger develops into a full finger, and then fingers 2, 3, and 4 now look like what used to be the first, second, and third fingers. But a study in 2018 found that this finger reducing or shrinking independently occurred in Limusaurus. And it found that after the fourth finger was lost, there was a shift.
Interesting.
Anyway, Limusaurus lived in a forested area with streams, wetlands, and shallow lakes that had warm, wet summers and dry winters. Other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include theropods, like Guanlong, the sauropod Mamenchisauris, and ornithischians such as Inlong. And other animals that lived around the same time and place include mammals, crocodiliforms, cynodonts, and turtles. And I'm sure a lot of them did fine around those sauropods.
A lot of them did. Some of them died horrible deaths.
We don't know how horrible it was. They were in the resting pose. On to our fun fact. I've got one last thing about dinosaur size. And it's that Bergman's rule that animals in cooler climates tend to be larger than close relatives that live in warmer climates doesn't seem to apply to dinosaurs.
I mean, Bergman's rule is about birds.
Bergman's rule's about animals in general, like mammals.
But one of the most famous ones is birds.
Yes.
So you're saying non-avian dinosaurs?
Oh, I see. Let me get into the study. It's more nuanced, just like all these studies that we've talked about today.
Okay.
So this was published in Nature Communications, an open access article by Lauren Wilson and others. And they found that Bergman's rule not only doesn't seem to apply to dinosaurs, it doesn't seem to apply to mammals.
So in other words, Bergman's rule just isn't right.
It's more of an exception than a rule, is how I saw it phrased one place. So Bergman's rule was proposed by Carl Bergman in the 1800s. And the idea, well, the rule is kind of the reason why we used to think that mammals and other animals, including birds, maintain constant body temperature or are homeothermic. In this study, the team compared 62 mammalia forms and 339 dinosaurs. And they looked at dinosaurs in the Prince Creek Formation in what is now Alaska. So this is late Cretaceous. They also analyzed almost 5,500 modern birds
Oh,
and
wow.
over 2,300 modern mammals.
That is a lot of animals.
Yes.
That's almost 10,000 animals.
Yeah. Well, they found no evidence of Bergman's rule for dinosaurs or mammal ancestors. For example, Nanooksaurus is similar in size to Daspletosaurus, even though Nanooksaurus was living in what's now Alaska and Daspletosaurus was way further south. The same goes for modern mammals. There's no notable increase in body size. They found that Bergman's rule worked a little bit for modern birds, but it didn't work for birds that lived in the Mesozoic. So it could be that the modern birds were influenced by climate change in the Cenozoic, which is our current era. So yeah, Bergman's rule is more of the exception than the rule, and it only seems to work for a subset of animals that can keep their body temperatures at the same level, so they're homeothermic, and only when you look at temperature and ignore other climate variables. So maybe it's a little too simplistic. What's cool about the study is they're saying they're using fossils to test current day scientific rules and hypotheses. And in an article on phys.org, one of the co-authors, Patrick Druckenmiller, said, quote, "You have to look to the past to understand how things became what they are today," end quote. Thought that was a good summary.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I had to double check Bergman's rule because I always think of it as an individual species. For example, if you have bald eagles, the bald eagles in Florida are significantly smaller than the bald eagles in Alaska, which are in a colder climate and higher latitude, you could say. But officially, Bergman's rule is that any taxonomic clade should follow that trend of the larger individuals being near the poles and the smaller ones being near the equator or near the warmer places. And I didn't realize that it applied to other clades. So like you were saying, you're comparing Daspletosaurus to Nanooksaurus. My first reaction was, wait, that's not Bergman's rule. Those are totally different animals. But they're in a clade together. So it's supposed to be that within theropods, the bigger theropods would be near the poles and the smaller ones would be near the equator, which definitely is not the case. We just think about some of the largest animals are near the equator in dinosaur times, and you get a lot smaller ones near the poles, at least from what we found so far.
That's true. Yeah, a lot of these rules, it's hard to have a blanket rule that applies to every situation.
Yeah.
Which is good to keep in mind when you hear about various rules.
Yeah, especially rules that were made when we had a much smaller data set than we have now.
Yes. And that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned because next week's episode will talk about what dinosaur brains can tell us.
Ooh.
Yes. And again, if you like our show, then please tell a friend. It helps us so much, and we'd really appreciate it. And then let us know if you told a friend. Thanks again, and until next time.